a mistake so common that most people never even realize they're doing it. They think with their emotions. Someone criticizes them, they react with anger. Someone praises them, they react with excitement. Something uncertain appears, they react with fear. And without realizing it, they hand over control of their decisions to something incredibly unreliable: their feelings. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The people who quietly dominate the world don't think this way. They don't rush their decisions. They don't react emotionally. And they don't allow temporary feelings to determine permanent outcomes. Instead, they operate with something very different: cold clarity. They step back. They observe. They analyze. And then they act with precision. Think about the most powerful negotiators, the most successful entrepreneurs, the most strategic leaders in history. They all share one trait: they can control their emotions while everyone else loses control. And that single skill gives them an enormous advantage. Because when someone loses control of their emotions, they expose themselves. They reveal weaknesses. They make mistakes. They rush decisions. They say things they regret. And the calm person in the room sees everything. The truth is simple. The one who controls their emotions controls the situation. And in this video, we're going to explore 4 psychological strategies that allow you to develop something very few people ever achieve: a mind that thinks strategically instead of emotionally. A mind that sees situations clearly while others panic. A mind that moves like a chess player while everyone else plays checkers. If you master these principles, you will start noticing something strange. Situations that once felt confusing suddenly become obvious. Conflicts become easier to navigate. Manipulation becomes easier to detect. And decisions become sharper. But be warned, these strategies require discipline. Because emotional thinking is easy, strategic thinking is rare. So if you're ready to understand how the most calculated thinkers operate, let's begin with the first principle. Principle number 1: the emotional delay rule. There is a psychological fact that most people don't know. Strong emotions are temporary. Research in behavioral psychology shows that the peak intensity of emotions like anger, excitement, and fear usually lasts between 10 and 15 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes. But during those 10 minutes, people destroy relationships. They ruin negotiations. They make terrible decisions. And they reveal weaknesses that others can exploit. Think about how many times someone has sent a message they later regretted, or made a decision while angry, or reacted impulsively during a stressful moment. In most cases, if they had simply waited 15 minutes, they would have responded completely differently. But they didn't wait. They reacted. And that reaction cost them. Strategic thinkers understand something important. Emotion is not the enemy. Reaction is. You don't need to eliminate your emotions. You only need to delay your reaction. That delay creates space. And that space gives your logical mind time to activate. The moment something emotional happens, the average person reacts immediately. But the strategic thinker does something very different. They pause. They step back. They observe their own emotional response. And then they ask themselves one simple question: if I removed my emotions from this situation, what would be the smartest move? That single question changes everything, because it forces the brain to switch from emotional thinking to analytical thinking. And the more often you practice this pause, the stronger your mental discipline becomes. Over time, you'll start noticing something fascinating. While others are arguing, panicking, or reacting impulsively, you remain calm, you remain focused, and you start seeing opportunities where others only see problems. This is why emotional discipline is one of the most powerful advantages a person can develop. Because the world is full of emotional reactions. but it is starving for calm thinkers. And every time you refuse to react impulsively, you gain power over the situation. Principle number 2: think in numbers, not feelings. Another mistake that most people make is trusting their feelings when making decisions. They say things like, "I feel like this is risky," or "I feel like this might work." But feelings are unreliable. They change depending on mood, stress, and environment. Strategic thinkers do something very different. They think in probabilities. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about this decision?" they ask, "What do the numbers say?" For example, imagine someone considering a business opportunity. An emotional thinker might say, "I feel excited about this idea," but excitement doesn't predict success. A strategic thinker looks at data, market demand, competitor performance, failure rates, customer behavior, and then they evaluate the probability of success. This shift from emotional thinking to numerical thinking dramatically improves decision-making. Because numbers remove bias, they remove wishful thinking, and they force the brain to analyze reality. This is why investors, strategists, and high-level decision-makers constantly rely on data. They know something most people ignore. Emotion creates illusions. Numbers reveal truth. But thinking in numbers doesn't mean ignoring intuition completely. It means testing intuition against evidence. If the evidence supports the idea, move forward. If the evidence contradicts it, reconsider. This habit alone can save people from countless mistakes. Bad investments, bad partnerships, bad decisions driven by excitement or fear. Because when you start thinking in probabilities, you stop guessing. And when you stop guessing, you start winning more often. Principle number 3: the third-person mindset. One of the strangest psychological contradictions in human behavior is this. People are incredibly good at solving other people's problems, but terrible at solving their own. When a friend tells you about a relationship issue, a career decision, or a conflict with someone else, the solution often seems obvious. You can clearly see what they should do. You notice the mistakes they're making. You recognize the patterns they are missing. But when you face a similar situation in your own life, everything suddenly feels complicated. Why? Because emotions distort your perspective. Attachment clouds your judgment. Fear exaggerates risks. Ego protects your current beliefs. And the result is that your brain becomes trapped inside a biased emotional viewpoint. Strategic thinkers solve this problem using something called the third-person mindset. Instead of analyzing a situation from inside their emotions, they mentally step outside themselves and observe the situation as if they were an outsider. Imagine you are watching your own life like a movie. You are not the character. You are the observer. Suddenly, everything becomes clearer. You see patterns that were invisible before. You notice behaviors you were ignoring. And you begin evaluating decisions logically rather than emotionally. This mental shift is extremely powerful. Because when you remove personal attachment from a situation, you can analyze it objectively. For example, imagine you are struggling with a difficult career decision. Instead of asking yourself what you feel like doing, ask a different question. If a friend came to you with this exact situation, what advice would you give them? Most of the time, the answer appears immediately. Because when the situation belongs to someone else, your emotions disappear. Only logic remains. This technique allows you to think like a strategist rather than a participant. And strategists always have a better view of the entire board. In chess, the best players don't react emotionally to individual moves. They observe the entire board. They predict future patterns. They think multiple steps ahead. When you apply this mindset to your own life, you begin doing the same thing. You stop reacting impulsively. You start evaluating long-term consequences. And suddenly, decisions that once felt overwhelming become clear strategic choices. This is why powerful thinkers constantly step outside their emotions. They understand that emotional attachment creates blind spots, but objective observation creates clarity, and clarity creates better decisions. Principle number 4. The fear neutralization strategy. Fear is one of the most powerful forces controlling human behavior. It makes people hesitate. It makes them doubt themselves. It makes them avoid opportunities that could change their lives. But here's the strange thing about fear. Most of the time, fear has very little to do with reality. Fear thrives on uncertainty. When the brain doesn't know what will happen, it fills the unknown with worst-case assumptions. Your mind begins imagining disasters, embarrassment, failure, loss, rejection. And these imagined outcomes become so vivid that they feel real. But strategic thinkers use a simple method to neutralize fear. They define it. Instead of avoiding the fear, they confront it directly by asking one powerful question. What is the absolute worst thing that could realistically happen? Not the imagined catastrophe. The actual worst, realistic outcome. Write it down. Describe it clearly. Analyze it. Once you do this, something interesting happens. The fear shrinks, because when you bring uncertainty into the light, it loses its power. For example, imagine someone afraid to start a business. Their mind might imagine total failure, but when they define the worst realistic outcome, it might look like this. They lose some money. They gain experience. They try again later with more knowledge. Suddenly, the situation is no longer terrifying. It becomes manageable. The next step is even more powerful. Ask yourself another question. Could I recover from that outcome? In almost every case, the answer is yes. People rebuild businesses. They recover from financial losses. They learn from mistakes. Failure is rarely permanent, but fear makes it feel permanent. Once you realize that even the worst outcome is survivable, fear loses its grip. And when fear disappears, action becomes possible. Strategic thinkers don't eliminate risk. They calculate it. They prepare for it. They build backup plans. And then, they move forward with confidence. While others remain trapped in hesitation, applying cold calculation in real life. Understanding these principles is powerful, but their true value appears when you begin applying them in real-world situations. Let's start with business and negotiation. One of the fastest ways to lose power in a negotiation is by reacting emotionally. The moment you show desperation, excitement, or frustration, you reveal your position. And once your position is visible, the other person gains leverage. Experienced negotiators know this. They remain calm. They take their time responding. They analyze every move like a chess player studying the board. Silence becomes their weapon. Patience becomes their advantage. Often, the person who speaks less controls the conversation more. Now consider arguments and debates. When two people argue emotionally, the conversation becomes chaotic. Voices rise, logic disappears, and both sides focus more on defending their ego than discovering truth. But the calm person in the room holds enormous power. Because emotional people reveal information. They expose their insecurities. They contradict themselves. They reveal what truly matters to them. And the calm observer notices everything. The more emotional someone becomes, the more predictable they become. This is why emotional discipline is such a powerful advantage in social situations. When you remain composed while others lose control, you gain psychological leverage. Next, think about difficult life decisions. Many people remain stuck because they rely on emotions to guide them. Fear tells them to stay safe. Comfort tells them to avoid change. Doubt tells them they are not ready. But strategic thinking requires a different approach. Remove emotions. Analyze the situation objectively. Evaluate risks and rewards. and ask yourself one simple question. What decision would move me into the strongest position long term? Often, the best decision feels uncomfortable in the short term, but powerful in the long term. Finally, consider social awareness. Once you begin understanding emotional psychology, you start noticing patterns in other people. You see how fear influences decisions. You see how insecurity drives behavior. You see how excitement causes people to overcommit. And because you recognize these patterns, you stop becoming controlled by them. Instead, you observe them, and observation gives you an enormous strategic advantage. The final realization: the world is full of emotional reactions. People react to headlines. They react to criticism. They react to pressure. And most of the time, they react without thinking. But the people who rise above the noise think differently. They pause. They observe. They calculate. They act only after understanding the situation clearly. This mindset doesn't make you emotionless. It makes you disciplined. It allows you to feel emotions without becoming controlled by them. And that single skill separates ordinary decision makers from strategic thinkers. Because the truth is simple. When emotions control your actions, your life becomes unpredictable. But when logic guides your actions, your path becomes intentional. You stop reacting to circumstances. You start shaping them. And over time, this quiet mental discipline creates a powerful reputation. People begin noticing something different about you. You don't panic under pressure. You don't react impulsively. You remain calm when situations become chaotic. And that calmness signals strength. Because true control is not about dominating others. It is about mastering yourself. Once you master your reactions, you master your decisions. And once you master your decisions, you begin mastering your future. So the question now becomes simple. Which mindset will you choose? The emotional mindset that reacts impulsively, or the strategic mindset that observes, calculates, and moves with precision? Because the difference between those two ways of thinking often determines the difference between losing control of your life and taking control of it. If this video made you think differently, make sure to subscribe to Darkmind 999. Because on this channel, we explore the psychology behind influence, strategy, and human behavior. And the more you understand how people think, the more powerful your decisions become. Until next time, stay observant, stay strategic, and remember, the one who controls their emotions often controls the outcome.